Young, beautiful and talented, Jim Morrison remains the model of what it means to be a rock star. To some, he was a hero of the counterculture. To others, he was corrupter of America's youth.
Break on through to the other side. Break on through to the other side.
Either way, until his death in Paris at the age of just 27, Jim Morrison was one of the biggest stars on the planet.
Jim Morrison was one of the most iconic, influential, hell-raising frontmen of all time.
Break on through to the other side. Break on through to the other side.
He is the archetypal doomed youth. He is the guy that every adolescent has to look towards at some point as a very romantic figure, a very tragic figure, and, you know, the guy that never got old.
Come on, come on, come on, come on, now touch me, babe. Can't you see that I am not afraid? What was that promise that you made?
He was a brilliant songwriter and a brilliant lyricist and a really unique character. He was almost from another time, almost a Byronic figure.
Now I'm gonna love you till the heavens stop the rain.
Regardless of whether you like the Doors music or not, Jim Morrison is a big part of the conversation when it comes to the history of rock, and always will be.
It was a chance meeting that changed everything. One day in July 1965, Ray Manzarek was at Venice Beach in Los Angeles when he bumped into a fellow graduate from UCLA. Their conversation turned to music and songwriting. Manzarek was already in a band, but he listened as the skinny man, 4 years his junior, began to sing.
Well, the clock says it's time to close now.
Morrison's voice was completely unique. He had a gravitas and a kind of demented, authoritative style.
His two favourite singers were Elvis Presley and Frank Sinatra. And if you listen to some of Morrison's crooning, you can hear echoes of both very, very clearly. Frank Sinatra actually said to somebody, if that kid doesn't stop impersonating me, I'm going to send the boys round to see him.
Jim Morrison had been living in Los Angeles for 18 months. He passed days on the beach and at night he slept on rooftops. It was a bohemian lifestyle of drugs and dropouts, poetry and music.
It all started in poetry for him. You know, as a child, he, read and read and read and introduced himself to the likes of Rimbaud or Camus, and he wanted to take in as much of this kind of artistic, poetic world as he could.
Jim absolutely saw himself first and foremost as a poet. He saw what he did with the Doors as a more lucrative way to be a poet. To this day, it's very hard to be a millionaire poet.
Morrison and Manzarek were joined by guitarist Robbie Krieger and drummer John Densmore. The Doors were born. Within a year, the group was opening at the Whiskey A Go-Go Club on the Sunset Strip. Within 2 years, they were topping the charts.
You know that it would be untrue. You know that I would be a liar if I was to say to you, girl, we couldn't get much higher. Come on, baby, light my fire. Come on, baby, light my fire.
The Doors were absolutely massive, and they still are. The big hit, which changed everything, was Light My Fire.
In America, Light My Fire kept the Beatles from #1. And not just that, it stayed at #1 for almost the entire summer.
And I was actually working for Elektra Records when the very first Doors album was released. It was a completely new front, in a way, the new world of what was evolving in the late 60s. I mean, hearing Light My Fire on an AM radio, driving around in America, or in England for that matter, was great. It just sounded so good.
They were kind of instantly thrust into fame, into being this huge band, but somehow also managed to kind of walk this line of being the counterculture at the same time as being, very commercially successful and being quite mainstream.
Light My Fire was an instant hit on its release in the summer of 1967. On September 17th that year, the fresh young stars were invited onto The Ed Sullivan Show. The Ed Sullivan Show was a broadcasting institution. Legends such as Elvis Presley and Diana Ross had lit up its stage. It was Ed Sullivan who had introduced the American public to the Beatles. Now it was the Doors' turn.
It seems incredible now, but the Doors got into a lot of trouble because Light My Fire has that line, "Girl, we couldn't get much higher." I mean, that's a fairly innocuous line. It could be about anything. But of course, everyone decided it was about drugs, which, to be fair, it probably was. But, you know, it's open to interpretation.
And the censors on the show say, you know, you can't sing the word higher, you have to change the lyrics because we don't want to infer that it's about drugs. And of course, they agree, but backstage agree not to.
Girl, we couldn't get much higher. Come on, baby, light my fire. Come on, baby, light my fire.
Ed Sullivan is outraged, he won't shake their hands, and a producer tells them, you'll never play on the Ed Sullivan Show again. And Jim Morrison replies, well, we've just done it. Why do we need to do it again?
Just a week after their appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show, the Doors released their second album, Strange Days. They experimented with unusual instrumentation and new recording methods. The quirky and sometimes disturbing results underlined their break with earlier pop music. The Doors were different, but they were reflecting an America in the grip of radical change.
One just for today. Love me 2 times. I've gone away.
Jim Morrison was very much reflecting what was going on in his lyrics. And so you have a song like The Unknown Soldier, which was talking about Vietnam and the fact that this was the first TV war. You know, you'd wake up in the morning and turn on breakfast news and there'd be these scenes of atrocity.
Here's a band that arrives right in the middle of the civil rights movement. Here's a band that arrives right in the middle of the whole hippie movement. Here's a band that arrives right in the middle of the anti-Vietnam movement.
Those songs that the Doors wrote at that time, the late 60s and early 70s, really soundtrack that kind of turn from the summer of love into this much darker period in American history.
The Doors were the perfect soundtrack to this age of uncertainty. Over the course of 6 albums, they became the biggest rock group in the United States.
The first time I actually saw him was at the famous Roundhouse concert in London in the summer of '68. And it was a fantastic evening. He was sensational.
Hello, I love you, won't you tell me your name? Hello, I love you, let me jump in your game. Hello.
But all was not well. Despite the critical acclaim and the chart-topping success, Jim Morrison was beginning to self-destruct.
Jim Morrison, I think, had been, a drug user before the Doors in the kind of LSD world of the late 60s in California. But his drinking was becoming more and more of a problem with the band. And that was the thing that started to really affect the performances and his relationships in the band.
Jim Morrison's alcohol problems were really severe. These days, it would have been instantly recognised for what it was, and he'd have been dragged to rehab. Back in the 60s, though, if you were feeling ill, depressed, screwed up in some way, don't worry, have a few lines of Coke, a few belts of Jack Daniels. See, you feel better now.
The recording studio became an alcohol-soaked battleground. Concert performances turned erratic.
On the 1st of March 1969, the Doors played in Miami, and this was a gig that became infamous because of the way Jim Morrison really riled up the crowd.
I'll keep your eyes on the road, you hand upon the wheel.
He was clearly very drunk, and he was antagonising the audience. Everyone's going crazy, there are fights breaking out, everyone's taking off their clothes. So, of course, the authorities were freaking out. There are various accounts of what actually happened. I think what actually happened is that he stuck his hand down his pants, but then somehow this was translated into exposing himself on stage, and the police came down on him hard.
I think Jim Morrison wanted to challenge and confront and also inspire that kind of behaviour in his audiences. It's very antagonistic. You know, he was, of course, on a number of occasions accused of inciting riots at the Doors live shows. And I think it's something that he enjoyed. He wanted to cause anarchy. He wanted to challenge the system and, you know, stick two fingers up to the authorities.
In September 1970, Morrison was found guilty of indecent exposure and sentenced to 6 months in jail. He paid a $50,000 bond to secure his freedom while the conviction was appealed. But his addiction and mental health issues could not be so easily resolved. With the Doors' 6th album still unfinished, Morrison fled the country. In March 1971, he headed for Paris. It was a night smeared with drugs and alcohol, a night of slammed doors and furious words, a night of screams disturbing the silence of a Paris apartment block. It was the night Jim Morrison died. On the evening of July 2nd, Morrison and his girlfriend Pamela Courson saw a movie and ate dinner in Paris. They then returned to his rented apartment on the Rue Beautreillis.
Jim Morrison died of heart failure, although there was no autopsy. He died in his bathtub. Pamela Courson found him. And the fact that there's no autopsy, because there was no evidence of foul play, means that there's been a lot of theories, whether he took a heroin overdose, you know, did his heart really just give out from drinking? It seems unlikely at 27, even though he's a very heavy drinker.
This is the end, beautiful friend.
It's strange the way these things seem to come in waves. I remember, you know, Hendrix, Joplin, and Morrison all went in a very compact period of time, and the face of music changed. It seems so pointless and so useless, but it was heartbreaking.
Mystery still surrounds the death. Only Courson and another friend ever saw the body. There was no autopsy, and no one could identify the doctor whose signature was scrawled on the death certificate. Paris had been Pamela Courson's idea. The 24-year-old had been in a relationship with Jim Morrison since the pair were at UCLA together.
Pamela Courson was a LA wild child, and they had this relationship where they were completely unfaithful, but at the same time, they had some kind of deep loyalty and love for each other. Accounts say that she was really charismatic as him, but completely wild, lawless.
She was quite integral to supporting him in his writing and his poetry. It said that she always saw him as a great poet, not as a rock star. And she really encouraged that artistic side of him. And of course, you know, she went with him to Paris in those final months to help him, you know, achieve that dream of becoming a writer.
Morrison arrived in Paris bearded and overweight, puffed up with alcohol. It was just a break. He wanted to get clean, to rediscover his connection with the words and the music.
There were two reasons that Paris appealed to Jim. The first is the obvious one. Gay Paris, wine, poetry.
Paris has this romantic place in the American imagination. I mean, going back to Hemingway and then later on jazz musicians. I mean, so many African-American jazz musicians found homes in Paris, and Morrison was aware of all of that and bought into the romance of that.
Also, he had a jail sentence hanging over him, and he was terrified. He was, when it comes down to it, a nice middle-class boy from an army background.
And he was looking at jail time in what Ray Manzarek told me was considered one of the toughest, roughest prisons in the whole of the United States. So Jim's lawyer advised him to get the hell out of Dodge while he still could before they took his passport. And that's why he took off for Paris.
I think he was there to try and escape the rock and roll lifestyle that he had created for himself. I think the fallout from the Miami incident had really affected him. He'd had enough. He wanted to go and be a poet in Paris. He wanted to be where his favourite poets, writers, philosophers had lived and worked.
He went for long walks through the city unrecognised. He stopped at every bookstall and busker he passed. He watched students protesting, children playing. A journal was always at his side. He shaved off the beard and lost weight, but he did not stop drinking. His addiction conquered his hopes for redemption. On July 7th, he was buried in Paris's Père Lachaise cemetery, joining the likes of Oscar Wilde and Molière, Edith Piaf and Chopin.
When the music's over, when the music's over here.
I think the young Jim Morrison would love the idea of being buried in Père Lachaise. Who wouldn't? It's gothic, it's amazing, you know, not just the people that are buried there, but the architecture, the vibe.
It's like a metropolis of the dead, with neighborhoods and districts and styles of architecture that change over the years.
And if you go and visit his grave, there will always be a couple of young backpackers sitting there, possibly smoking a joint, saying a little prayer to him. And the entire place is covered in, you know, flowers and vodka bottles and all the rest of it. I don't know whether he'd love that aspect so much, but he probably would like the fact that he was, you know, kind of deified and continues to be to this day.
The news of Morrison's death filtered through to America. His bandmates resolved to carry on without him.
The Doors continued, but it just wasn't the same. They made 2 more albums, Other Voices and Full Circle, but those albums are nothing like the ones that came before. It just doesn't have the same musical thrust and kind of lyrical power.
They do audition 3, 4, 5 different singers, none of whom quite works out.
Ultimately, the Doors weren't the Doors without Jim Morrison, and the band did split up.
Pamela Courson inherited Morrison's entire fortune, but she found no happiness in the years after his death. She could never escape that night in Paris, nor the drugs which had consumed her relationship with Morrison. She died in 1974 from a heroin overdose at the age of 27. Jim Morrison has lost none of his allure in the decades since his death. He was the prototypical rock star, oozing rebellion and sex appeal, talent and charisma. His legacy can be seen in the strut of every rock singer since.
I think Jim Morrison's impact on music is quite interesting. He managed to blur the lines between poetry and music and kind of art, creativity and the mainstream, and really inspired other musicians to look deeper.
I think Jim Morrison helped create the mould for what became, rock's leading men of the album era.
You can see a very, very direct influence on certain bands. I mean, Iggy and the Stooges were apparently Iggy Pop's attempt to be like Jim Morrison. You can see the influence on Echo and the Bunnymen. Ian McCulloch always said that it was the Doors he looked up to.
Eddie Vedder from Pearl Jam, who talk about the way that he wrote these kind of very poetic lyrics. They were also great influences on what he did with Pearl Jam.
But on a wider level, they sort of set the template for alternative music. Because, you know, the songs were accessible, they're really, really good, you know, they're well written, they're not hard to listen to. But at the same time, they're suggestive of other worlds.
I think Jim Morrison had as much an impact on popular culture as he did on popular music. His style, his iconography of how he looked, how he carried himself, how he challenged authority, those key messages, they've become very much ingrained in the kind of late 60s and 70s and then inspired future generations.
When you're strange, faces come out of the rain. When you're strange, no one remembers your name. When you're strange, when you're strange, when you're strange.
He's, I think, as present in the musical imaginations of listeners today as Jimi Hendrix or the Beatles.
His legacy is forever shaped by his death, however. In our collective memory, we have erased what he became.
You cannot petition the Lord with prayer!
He is remembered not as the overweight alcoholic drinking his talent away, but as young and beautiful, the shamanic waif who mesmerized audiences and defined the music of a generation.
His early death is not just an integral part of his mystique, it's the entire reason for his mystique. If Jim Morrison was a fat alcoholic now, it would not be the same.
When he died, he killed the Doors, but he also guaranteed them immortality.
Who knows what he would have turned out, but we'll never know. So he has this almost perfect catalog of recordings that sound great and never die.
You know the day destroys the night, night divides the day. Try to run, try to hide, break on through to the other side, break on through.